Góðan daginn, gott fólk, og verið velkomin á innsetningarathöfn Rannveigar Ólafsdóttur, prófessor í ferðamálafræði. Þetta er siður og hefð sem við höfum verið að innleiða núna á síðustu árum og hefur gefist nokkuð vel, allavega fyrir okkur sem fáum að fylgjast með og gefur okkur tækifæri til að fara aðeins yfir ferilinn með vísindamönnum okkar og einnig aðeins að sjá hvað átt þeir hyggjast fara. Það kemur margt skrítið í ljós oft á þessum fyrirlesturum og spennandi og það er líka hugsunin og gaman að sjá að kalla til vini og nánustu umhverfinu og ættingja og samstarfsfólk. Þannig að það er svona tækifæri til þess að fagna með þeim sem hafa hlotið framgang. En við hugsum þetta líka til þess að kynna það sem framfer í skólunum og að því að skólinn er nú í alþjóðlegu samhengi þá höldum við þessa innsetningarathöfnir alltaf á ensku. Kannski gerum við það seinna að fara aftur yfir á íslensku því að okkur er umhugað að sum fræði eins og til dæmis ferðamálafræði að þau hljóti grunn og málfar í íslensku og það er kannski umhugsunarefni fyrir okkur að skoða það aðeins aftur tilbaka. En fyrir þennan tilgang til kynningar að þá látum við þetta fara fram á ensku. Og þá skipti ég hér með yfir í ensku. Rannveig Ólafsdóttir was born in 1963. Her education is in academic education and training. Was in 1992 she received a bachelor degree from the Department of Geoscience, University of Iceland, in geography. In 1994 she received the second bachelor degree in geology, Department of Geoscience as well, at the University of Iceland. Along with the degree in geology and geography, she studied pedagogy and has a diploma in education from the Department of Education. And it's important that more and more of our academic scholars have a professional training in pedagogy and in teaching and a valuable asset in our work. She received a PhD from the Physical Geography Department on physical geography and ecosystem analysis in Lund University in Sweden in 2001. So she belongs to the new centennial doctorates at the university that are more and more progressing to professorships, and we already have now 3 professors that actually graduated in this century. After graduation, she became a lecturer at the Department of Geography and Ecosystems. She moved to Iceland in 2002 and became director of the University of Iceland Research Center in Hornafjörður. She's been a lecturer at the Department of Geoscience and at the University of Iceland since 2003. And 2006-07 she was a consultant to environmental management and environmental impact assessment for Línuhönnun, a consulting engineering firm in Iceland. 2007 she went back to Tourism Research Center, and 2007 and until now an associate professor at the Department of Geography and Tourism at the University of Iceland. She is served as a head of the Department for Geography and Tourism from 2012 to 2013, and currently now, and hopefully for a long time, a professor at the Department of Geography and Tourism at the university. It's from young age, since she was 20, she also worked as a tourist guide in Iceland. And in those times, it's not that long ago, but at that time, tourism had not received the attention and the magnitude we see today. So in her work experience, in her studies and life, she's seen the changes that we all follow so interestingly at the time. And I also know that her interest in her hobbies in mountain climbing, nature observation, traveling, and theatre and literature is shared by a lot of us. And it is very important for us that some of our academics take a good look at this and watch over the changes in nature and in our society when paramount changes in our businesses and society take place, like tourism is happening over the last few years. So I look forward to your lecture. I think it's a burning question today, and it's a very important work that you're providing to the society. And get us away.
Thank you. It almost feels like my second disputation of PhD study, but I want to start to say thank you, Hilmar, for this introduction. And thank you everyone for being here with me today, celebrating this milestone of mine. And I want to do a special thanks to my sons sitting over there, as it is I think it is the first time. I think it is their first time listening or not seeing something else of me than only the time-consuming work of the university teacher. I'm going to give you a short, let me see, this was the, no? I'm learning, okay. Is this a pointer? No. Okay. I'm going to give you a short overview of my work so far in geography and tourism studies. I will begin with a short insight into my previous work, taking you towards my current work, and where I've taken out few selected few of my research projects to present for you here today. And I will end by a little vision of my future research. So a very simple schedule for you here today. And I also must add that it is I have to say it's a privilege for me to have you all here just listening to me about my work for the next half an hour. And the things I love them most, both teaching and research. My current work, as Hilmar said, belongs to the field of geography, not to the tourism studies, but my academic story starts or belongs to the field of geography. So I would like to start there. I maybe emphasize what Hilmar said. My relation to tourism studies in previously was that during my studies here in geography and geology in this university, I also finished the fulfillment in a tourist guide and worked as a tourist guide, as he said, since every summer since until the millennia. After completing my study in geography, I had the privilege of working with Professor Ólafur Arnalds on his project in assessment and mapping of soil erosion and desertification in Iceland, which I'm very grateful as it provoked my interest of further study. But before heading in that directions, I worked on my, I think, greatest piece of work, that are my two sons. After that, I went to Lund, and that's where my postgraduate story starts. From very beginning, Lund was a great source of academic inspiration and motivation to me. The decision going to Sweden came after receiving a grant from our Ministry of Education. And then while being in Sweden, I got a 5 years PhD grant that included 20% teaching. In my PhD study, I focused on the spatial and temporal assessment of land degradation and climate in Iceland, using first and foremost the techniques of remote sensing, geographical information system, as well as system dynamic modeling. And these are all methods that I'm trying to incorporate into tourism studies today. And I like also to mention that Lund University was and still is among the world's leading universities in remote sensing and GIS. Going back home, now I'm repeating a little bit what you already heard from Hilmar. But going back home, I moved to Höfn in Hornafjörður, taking this job as a director of the University of Iceland Rural Research Center. Having my roots in the Westfjords, I have to admit that I saw it in a romantic light, moving or living in the countryside, especially for my boys. And I can say that my years in Höfn were challenging. During my first months, I had my office in the fish factory there. I was alone with no research money. Moreover, I can say that in a rural community basing its income on for decades on fisheries and agriculture, my job was not really a job. I heard very often, what is he doing there? And I think it's almost a research theme for itself. However, I carried out numerous tasks and research projects while staying in Höfn, but in order to better integrate the university and the local community, as was one of the major aims of the center, I started to focus on tourism. My biggest project in that field that I launched in Höfn was the NEST project. NEST stands for Northern Environment of Sustainable Tourism. And it was a European collaboration between Iceland, Scotland, Sweden and Finland, supported by the EU Northern Periphery Programme. My research center was the lead partner in this project, the first Icelandic lead partner within the Northern Periphery Programme. The overall goal of the NEST project was to promote sustainable rural development through the growth and management of nature and culture based on tourism within and in connection to protected areas. When leaving Höfn after 4 years, I had managed to increase the center budget from 1 to 4 full positions. So I was both proud and satisfied. Moving back to Reykjavik, then I got this job as a consultant in one of my favorite subjects in both environmental management and environmental impact assessment. And being there, I obtained a valuable experience and contacts in the life outside of the academia. And in 2007, I started this joint position. That was a joint position between the University of Iceland and the Icelandic Tourism Research Center. And then in 2010, I started here as a full position as associate professor. So just to tell you a little bit about my work here at the university. As a university teacher, we do really three things. Firstly, it is teaching. that we definitely spent great amount of time on. I've been involved in numerous undergraduate and graduate courses, and I am a supervisory teacher of 10 courses. I have also been quite active in designing new courses, mainly focusing on tourism and environment. And I have to say that I'm proud being part of the great team building up the teaching subject, tourism studies. One of the youngest subjects within the university, originated by my college, Anna Dóra Sæþórsdóttir, in 1999. I have also been in the consortium of an Erasmus Mundus joint European master course in Geoinformation Science and Earth Observation for Environmental Modeling and Management, which is a collaboration between University of Iceland, University of Lund in Sweden, University of Twente in Holland, in the Netherlands, University of Southampton in England, and University of Warsaw in Poland. And if you keep on, then we have secondly, as a work of a university teacher, is administration. I was head of department, as Hilmar mentioned, a few years back, and I worked in numerous university committees, and I've also worked in quite many selection committees that have taken considerable amount of time. And in general, we can say a number of other services. Lastly, there is research. When conducting a research, we most often start from the bottom. We have to come up with ideas. We have to evaluate our ideas. We have to fix money and hire staff. That most often is some of our students. And write research proposal, research progress reports, and research paper. We also have to attend conferences to present our ideas and our results, and to create contacts. But research also involves peer review and evaluation of research conducted by other researchers. I have to say that I kind of like this diversity of the academic work, and of these three categories, I would say that teaching is the most important job, at least the way I look at it. And I can admit that I love teaching, and I love integrating with students that keep me reminded of the era that we live in. But the truth of the matter is that professors are judged by the research, so that is what I'm going to focus on for the rest of my talk here today. The nature of tourism studies has an interdisciplinary approach, as tourism touches nearly all branches of society and nature. My approach in tourism studies is from my background in physical geography. And I have been involved in a number of research projects, and I can broadly divide my work into these 8 categories. That's environmental impact of tourism, sustainable tourism, wilderness mapping, tourism and system dynamics, tourism and climate change, tourism and environmental management, geotourism, and second home tourism. What I can say that unites my approach to all these themes is this spatial dimension. That in my mind is critical in understanding environmental change due to tourism. So let me give you a brief overview of the first 4 of these categories. I have past year mainly been focusing on recreational in this this approach, I have mainly been focusing on recreational tramping, impacts of power plant construction on tourism development, and mapping ecological sensitivity. Looking at the recreational trampling, I have mainly been focusing on hiking trails condition, and last summer I started to look at experimental ecological impact of trampling. Understanding environmental impact from recreation is, in my mind, of vital importance, as our nature is still the fundamental basis for Icelandic tourism. This project on recreational trampling started as a part of a larger project conducted in Laki a few years back, where the base for a 5-class condition class that is here. I'm not asking you to read, but this is a scheme of a condition class scale that was set there in this Laki project. And areas like these represent a very bad condition class. That is, if we have the condition class from very good to very bad, and then it is based on numerous other measurements that we are measuring in field to map the trails, the condition of these trails. The scale was further tested in Vatnajökull National Park before applied in a case study that I carried out in Fjallabak and Þórsmörk, where you see the maps from here, where we aim to map and analyze the severity of current trampling impacts and to examine the relationship between trail condition and physical factors related to trails location. When we say physical factors, I'm meaning like elevation, slope, aspect, vegetation cover, soil cover, ecological sensitivity, etc. And these different colors of that you see there of the trails are this is the Þórsmörk area, and this is the Landmannalauga Fjallabak area. This is Frostastaðavatn. And the color stands for different severity or different condition class, better to say. We did not find any critical relationships between any of those physical factors tested between the physical factors and the condition classes. I'm just showing you a few samples. And that underpins the impact of number of tourists that we did not test, as we don't have yet those data about number of tourists visiting each site or walking or hiking each of the trail. But this all looks better, and it is gradually coming. As I mentioned before, then we started last summer a pilot project supported by the Icelandic Tourist Board using experimental plots. And then we can ask why experimental plots. But using a simulated experimental approach gives us the advance to control use and environmental factors that we will hope that will maximize our insight into both cause and effects. So, because on the normal hiking trails, we don't know all those factors. We don't steer the factors. We don't know exactly how many have been there, etc. Our aims with this project is to explore the resistance of Icelandic ecosystem to different recreational pressures, such as trampling, biking, and horse riding. And this summer we started with trampling. By assessing the impact of diverse levels of use and the long-term recovery of the ecosystem. We selected three types that, according to my colleague Guðrún Gísladóttir, is the strongest and weakest towards trampling. So we selected grassland, moss heath, and moss. And after setting our experimental plots, we simply hiked back and forth a different amount of times in each of our 5 lanes, resulting in different impacts according to the different number of tourists. And then we got different impacts that you see that we selected numbers after going through extensive literature review. I came to the conclusion of using 25 tourists, 75 tourists, 200 tourists, and 500 tourists. This is kind of a scheme that is used in many other countries and gives us a chance to do a comparison with other countries. And this is, of course, most striking in the moss cover. And if you look here, you can, this is how our experimental plots looked out in field. And you can, and we kind of, it was randomly selected. We always had one lane that was like a control lane that we didn't hike. And then it was kind of randomly with 25 tourists, with 75, 200 and 500. And you see we divided in the middle. So half of the lane, each lane was 20.2 meters, or 20.1.5 meters. Also numbers that we kind of got through the literature. And in the half of the lane, we hiked with sticks, these hiking poles, and without them in the second time. And then we did measurements in each to get the average number. We did measurements of soil moisture, soil compaction, vegetation cover, vegetation height or soil depth, and then we took pictures of each plot. So we took 3 in each of them, and 6 plots in each lane. So it was lot of data that we got, and you see here from this picture, then you see this is the 500th tourist that have hiked here, this lane, and you see the poles. That half of it we hiked with the poles there. And let me see. I like this last factor, this image analysis, being with my background in remote sensing, so on. It was we were kind of interested. Can't we use? Doing all those measurements like is usually done, but can we do anything with images? Can we use images to detect the changes? And it's taking a lot of time, but we haven't come down to the conclusion, except we just hired a master's student last week to do this for us. That's a good solution. It is interesting to see what she will come up to. But just to give you just an indication of unprocessed pictures, what we are trying to see, these are completely unprocessed. And this is just to see, you see 2 passes. You can see I can say there is of the one footprint here. Yeah, you see the footprint here, from here, just on this picture, and then it is after 25 passes, and you just slowly see. But like I said, these pictures are unprocessed, so they're kind of 75 passes, and you see little how these parameters that I was saying, like the compaction is changing, and the 300 tourists, 300 passes, 400 passes, and 500, we got a real path there. And then it's the science like soil, how the soil erosion we get down from the moss and from the plants, and how all this processes starts that we are interested in. As I mentioned, it was, we are still doing a lot of measurements, and we haven't got all the conclusion yet, and all the results yet, but there is an interesting results that we got here. Usually I've been so negative of people when they are using all those poles, especially in those sensitive moss cover, and you see them doing this, and I've heard someone saying that in national parks in United States, there is some places that you're not allowed to use poles and so on, and I thought, yeah, that's a great management and so on. And so I've been rather negative, seeing it's always more and more tourists each summer with using hiking sticks or poles. But here, what we are seeing here, from these measurements, on just to give you an example, that tourists with poles or without poles, they are having greater impact on factors like soil depth or soil compaction, and it is significant. It is significant in all those. The red line is with sticks, tourists with sticks, and the blue line is without sticks. So we thought that was quite interesting, even if we are not, if this is not completed. Taking you further, I said I've also been focusing on a lot of tourism and sustainability. And I consider sustainability to be of critical importance for Icelandic tourism, and I think that importance is only increasing with increased tourism. My focus has mainly been so far on the use of GIS in sustainable tourism planning and management, sustainable tourism and protected areas, the role of tourism in sustainable development of Arctic rural communities, sustainable tourism indicators, and public participation and GIS. And the last three issues, I can say, they are the main focus by one of my PhD students in a project we do in collaboration with the University of Umeå in Sweden. One major conclusion I would like to share here with you, when we were focusing on the ability of stakeholders to promote sustainable tourism in protected areas, a project funded by the Friends of Vatnajökull. It is according to this spectrum, and once again, don't want you to read this, I just want you to be aware of it, that we have, there exists a spectrum of sustainable development, and this spectrum goes from, very weak to very strong. There's the position, the sustainability position. And after taking a lot of interviews with stakeholders, with people working with tourism in the northern territory of Vatnajökull National Park, our conclusion were that the sustainability position, the ability of those stakeholders to promote sustainable tourism is very, very weak. And maybe not surprising, but emphasize that we have to move towards very strong position in that spectrum, in my opinion. And taking you to the next research category, wilderness mapping, we can maybe ask, what has wilderness mapping to do with tourism? Well, it is well known that a large majority of tourists visiting Iceland come to experience our wilderness, and that there is simply a lack of wilderness mapping and assessment, wilderness assessment here in Iceland. My project so far has been in this assessing wilderness quality with respect to nature-based tourism, GIS assessment of Icelandic wilderness through time, and new approaches for wilderness perception mapping, and purism scale approach for wilderness mapping in the southern Icelandic highlands. And as a result of those projects, this was a map based on distance analysis using the legal definition. Of course, it is a huge debated this what is wilderness. I'm not going to go into this. Or that we used simply the legal definition that we find in our law number 44 of nature conservation, number 44 from the year 1999. And also available digital data. Our calculated variables were remoteness from mechanized access, remoteness from permanent settlement, and then apparent naturalness that include, for example, power lines and power constructions, for example. And then a similar map based on the same data and same definition, but using a different method of viewshed analysis. Viewshed analysis is that it simply means that if the viewer is standing on somewhere in the landscape, that we exclude all cells that he doesn't see from the model. This was taken further by one of my master students, looking at distribution of geotagged photos on the World Wide Web. And all the red dots are all the photographs taken that he found taken in the eastern part of Iceland. And he added then, converted this image and added the density of photographers as a parameter into the model. And he also took more parameters like the cell phone coverage into the previous model. And his conclusion of the wilderness quality was then like this, that we have the wilderness quality grade as high where the green is, in the middle of Vatnajökull. And too low. Another master student assessed the changes of Icelandic wilderness from 1936 to 2010 by digitizing from old maps, roads and power lines. And this map shows a temporal decrease in the largest area free from roads and power lines within the Icelandic highlands. But many of you might know that we kind of count quality, wilderness quality, by the size of each area. So at once when we cut the area down with road or power line, we are kind of decreasing the quality of wilderness. And you see here the largest. This is 36, and the large area how it is decreasing towards Vatnajökull. Our latest project in wilderness mapping is mapping wilderness perception. And this we are using the purism scale approach. Purism stands for, and this scale approach is here, that you have on the one end the most remote and rural and primitive condition, and on the other side you have the least remote and natural. This is because tourists are different. Some tourists, they simply want service and want urban areas, while others are seeking for more primitive condition and don't want any service at all. And then they have the spectrum, but we have all types of tourism ranging from this. And so focusing on the southern highlands, using data, perception data of tourists in this area, we got this conclusion that from we have here almost the whole area. It is supposed to be the same colors here. We have here the non-purists, and they are here the non-purists. So almost the whole area that is here is considered wilderness by the non-purist visitors, while less than half of the area is considered wilderness by the strong purist. And here we have this the legal definition that designated the map that I showed you before. So this is kind of one way for us to map our wilderness and to think about our wilderness resource that we are having for or selling to our tourists. To analyze the seasonality of wilderness perception, the geotagged photos that I showed you before are a very interesting data indicating areas of no or less traffic in different seasons. So this is just to show you, it's very interesting to use those data that we have, that we have, and then we can assume that where we have no photos, there's like the areas of the most solitude. And then to the last category of my research that I'm going to talk with you here today is this tourism and system dynamics. We are then aiming here to assess how increased infrastructure changed tourist demands and influence landscape impact sensitivity scale from pristine land to urban. So we are continuing here with this purism scale, and this simply means that how much infrastructure do we need to build up when we change the area from a primitive area to urbanized area. It's kind of what we like to assess here is so-called point of irreversibility. And system dynamics is a great tool in my mind. And the major advances using system dynamic approach lie first and foremost in the easily obtainable holistic view of all factors impacting a system. And once when having a holistic view, analysis of causal relation become easy. And thus, what if scenarios become easily applicable when we have this view. This is a causal loop diagram of our system in our project, indicating balancing and reinforcing causal loops with attractiveness of natural site as a core variable. We are focusing on how much infrastructure will change a site, and then the different purist type that we have here. Non-purist we have the non-purist here and the strong purist here on each end of this purist scale. And then if it just simply to look closer of the core loops, then we can say here, I think we can say that it is the pristineness, if we can use that word. No, it is a pristineness that the strong purists are seeking for. They are seeking for this country, the sites that not many other tourists are, that it's as pristine as possible. So that is kind of what attracts the strong purist visitor to a site. And then when they have been, they come back home. We can say that it is the word of mouth that they come and they say this was a fantastic area and so on. So they increase this factor here, this core factor of attractiveness of natural site. And that, so we have kind of what is called a reinforcing loop here. the more strong purists come, the more people know about the area. And that's impacts that we get more tourists, we increase the number of tourists, that then have negative impact on this originally factor that was getting those here. So we get a balancing loops, what is here. But still it is the pristineness that was the attractive factor. So this is kind of just like a, yeah, this is like, yeah, we can say in this core model, it is the strong purists that are the explorer of a site, like Butler says in his model that he calls those. And looking maybe, taking it a little bit, I'm not going to go through all of this, just showing the interest of this analysis. That if we look at it in the next one, we were looking at this first loop before, and then if we take now the number of visitors as was the result from the first loop, and then we can look at this one. The more more tourists that come, the demand for increased infrastructures and increased services increases. And then we get people investing in the area in infrastructure and services. And that means we get increased infrastructure. And that means more infrastructure simply means that we are changing the type of tourist visiting the area. So we get the non-purist visitors, more of them coming to the area. That all for se increases the number of visitors. And tourism infrastructure for se also increases with increased access, with increased service, and with increased infrastructure, gradually increases, of course, the attractiveness of the area by a larger amount of tourist and visitors. So we get two reinforcing loops in this. So that's how all the system works. Like I said, it is. I'm not going to go through all of this. Just going to point out how this model works, and this is like a simple conceptual model, so-called causal loop diagram. But to convert this into a dynamic model, we will add real data into this model, using sites, two sites, Landmannalaugar Þórsmörk as one site and Snæfell Lónsöræfi as the second site, and compare those two sites together. And just to say, make your attention to two things here in this model. That's these two, what gets out of the model. And that is, like I said, the point of the reversibility, the increased urbanization, what we in the site, and then on the other end, it is the changed environmental status of sites because of increased impact. Land degradation, we say here, increased land degradation with increased impact. Of course, increased infrastructure is also increased impact and a source of a management tool. So we don't end here, but anyhow, we always change the environmental status, whatever way we will go. So this was this. So come almost to the end. When I came to this slide here, I just simply said to myself, I simply don't know where to start, because it is so much lack of research in tourism, and there is so much need. As our environment, both cultural and natural, is changing so fast. And in my opinion, it has never been more important to know and understand the responses of our research of our environment to increase the impact of tourism. So I could add here, what should I say, 100,000 types of different projects. But in the closest future, I will continue with what I've been doing right now. Doing this tourism and system dynamics model that I was just showing you, we can play with questions like this. How will we see tourism in Iceland in 2025, 2050, 2100? Remember I said that what if scenarios are easily applicable using system dynamics. So that is kind of a thing we are going also to do as a continuation of this system dynamic model. And that's a question I'll leave up to you. Maybe how are we going to get where we want to be? But it is this tourism and system dynamic modeling of future scenarios of Icelandic tourism that I hope that we can increase in size and make a big collaboration work. That is our aim, to do that and get other more collaborators with us. The second one there, environmental impact of tourism, that big theme and a big interest of mine. We will start next summer continuing with this trampling that we have done now. We will continue and do the same with like experimental plots on biking tourism and horse-based tourism. So I'm looking for volunteers that want to bike back and forth with me on these lanes, and horses as well. That we are also doing, and we want to increase it with collaborators in Norway, and Sweden, and England, and hopefully later on with Australia, having Leah there. I know that she's been working with a lot of team in Australia. They have come so much further than we in this matter and these researches. So I think that we can really learn from them in our next steps there. And then wilderness mapping. So I'm really building on my previous research and experiences here. I have been in collaboration with Steve Carver in University of Leeds in England and his Wildland Research Institute. And there is a great interest of building a larger project on this mapping. There is a lot of people doing it, as it was a EU regulation, I think, from 2000 something. That we have to do better in saving those more understanding, at least, the changes that is happening in Europe to what as regard wild land. And then I am just these days doing a proposal on public participation GIS, and I hope it will be. This is how can we get the public to be more involved in management and planning of tourism. And I hope that also will be a larger project than it is today. And with that, I say thank you. And I want to thank all my collaborators and my colleagues and my students, and of course you, for coming here and spending this time here with me and with us. Thank you.
I told you it was going to be interesting, but I didn't realize it was that interesting.
Should I start again?
Yes, I seriously thought. As we said, this is the most current issue we have, probably, in Iceland. Just like you said, if this is your enthusiasm in research, and your real enthusiasm is in teaching, then we can just question what are you doing in teaching. But at this moment, we finish with the lecture, and this is the last time we get to ask you difficult questions before you enter into professorship. They may be silly. I hope your friends and family realize that what a good example and good idol you are.
Do you?
Yeah, we have that on our. I have one very serious question for you. Just like you said, I think we all have passion in university for teaching, and that's why we're here, because of teaching. But I think a lot of us live in Iceland because of the wilderness and the nature. And it's striking. The numbers, the quantification you're doing are striking. And in our treatment of natural resources, there are two things that we have done. The good thing, we hit the brake. We've done it on waterfalls, we've done it on fisheries. The bad thing is we usually do it at the latest as we can or too late. Where are we in tourism? Are we getting too late, or where are we in tourism?
Just as you said, it is happening so fast. As a researcher, it is very interesting. I mean, we actually just see things happening. We see the changes. So it is very interesting. But sometimes I think we need to take the step a little bit back and look, why are we in so much hurry? Maybe because it is maybe get into a little political here. It is the freedom. I mean, it is just we are doing it. Everybody is trying to make jobs, especially in the countryside. It is rural development as well, and it is pushed as this big factor in. I mean, we only had in the countryside those mainly two big posts, agriculture and fishery, and now we have tourism, so people see it as a source of being able to live still in the countryside. So that's very positive. But on the other hand, it reminds me a little bit on what we said in the farm, when one cow pee, they all pee. So we are a little bit in there. So to answer that, I have to say I'm a little scared. I think we're doing it too fast. I mean, we had examples from other employments, like in the fishery, that we had collapse. But I sure hope, I will believe that we will be, we will be more clever than that.
Right.
That's my hope, at least.
If you sense that, I feel that you are probably one of the most important researchers in Iceland currently, you and your colleagues. It is right. So the floor is open. Please ask Rannveig and pay respect to what she's doing. And I seriously hope that we get some interesting question on the subject. And don't be afraid to get political. This is a political and a hot potato.
Yes,
so please.
Recording that.
Yeah. Go ahead. Yes.
First, I want to congratulate you on your new job.
Thank you.
And it is, I was thinking about that you were taking your stand now the same day as our Minister of Environment is talking about Náttúrupassa and the environment, which our common friend Kenneth Mauney refers to as Náttúrupasta. That's another thing. But there is one thing that struck me. You are apparently, and of course, according to your earliest education in geology and geography, you are focused on the nature. I would like to have some comment from you about the connection between your research and what I would refer to as the image of the country. Image of the country and image of the nature. What we might call the identity of Iceland. What exactly are you researching? What exactly is the story you are finding for us to enjoy?
As regard the image of Iceland?
The image of Iceland, I'm not talking about the cultural image, I'm talking about the natural image.
Yeah, exactly. I think in my research it is the most important to increase our understanding of all the factors that lead to changes. When we get more tourists, like I said, you have tourists that are seeking for different things. Then when we increase the number of tourists, we are getting different types of tourists. We are getting different types. We are getting tourists that ask for more service and more activities, more everything. And those tourists often give a lot more money. So the local people also think that this type of tourism is positive. But at the same time, we are changing the environment. And it is not easy to go back. And I am not against process in tourism or in increased tourism, but my fear is that we are not doing any management or planning, and this management and planning has to be based on knowledge and understanding of the processes, and it is this understanding that we lack in our country. That's why we are doing this experimental plot to say how many tourists do we need to get a serious soil erosion. Soil erosion that is not maybe reversible. So we need things like that because we can simply, if we plan ahead, that we seldom do, then we can simply put a path, a hiking path. We don't need to put it right across. Yeah, if we have a slope or a moss heath or something, we can put it somewhere else. That in an area that we know that will bear this or will tolerate this amount of tourists. Because we as tourists, because I am a tourist, of course myself, we are a little bit like like the animals. If there is a path, we go the path if it is. But here it is kind of simply lacking in many places. Or what is more, as Hilmar was asking, about the status today, we are using, it is the sheep here in Iceland that have planned most of the hiking paths here. No, I mean that's so, and it's still being doing today. And then we go as the human with the sticking poles and put them where the sheep put them ahead. So that's what, and taking it to Náttúrupassið, that I knew it would come because it is, and I didn't believe it when I heard the news this morning that it was actually happening today. What will happen with all this infrastructure, like in this dynamic model that I was showing you, that if you have to pay to a certain amount, you don't have to pay to all the Iceland. Our minister has been emphasizing that again and again and again. It is only the most popular places, okay? And that's good for Geysir, Þingvellir, etc. And we get a lot of money, we build up great infrastructure there, a lot of services, restaurants and perfect paths and so on, that will tolerate 1 million tourists. But those 1 million tourists, when they now have to pay, they think twice. I can hang myself here to that because they think twice. Maybe large amount of them will go to there, but there will be an amount of those, part of those 1 million that will find new places. And then it has been also discussed, and they say that's good because then we distribute our tourists. But this discussion, according to me, is kind of lacking because okay, it is, we are distributing the impact, so it is not the same impact. But when we have built up this infrastructure that will take all this mass tourism, I would say it is good that then get 90% of the tourists to use them, and then will we save the rest of the country. That's how I would like to see it. But it seems like all kind of this discussion is lacking in my mind.
Sounds like another lecture.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
More? Karl?
Yeah, one question here. Your last topic you mentioned as a future emphasis, basically, is public participation, GIS. I'm quite interested in that. it's a fascinating new field of research, basically. And you are talking about sort of using this, if I understood you correctly, to find ways of allowing local people to sort of take more part in the planning of tourism than has previously perhaps been the case. Can you elaborate on that a little bit? How do you see these possibilities?
Yeah. We did a little case study here in Katla Geopark, where we just took a little sample of people, and we went with them with big maps and aerial photos and asked them a few questions. Where do you want to see areas protected? Where do you want to see services be built? Where do you want to see, and etc. So they kind of could set, but we kind of steered their, so they had to put it the conclusion themselves on a little ticket. So that's it's actually, and then we are trying to use them, classify their answers, and trying to use them as a one layer in the geographical model. So you have the community and the administration and the planning and all that as one layer, and then you can add their decision, their mapping, that they think this area should be protected because it is, or this area is too. That's where I want to see, the services being built up because of this and that. So there can be in this model, and in the geographical model you have many layers, and then you come down to one conclusion. So I see it a little bit as this, but in Katla Geopark we when we had been doing that and we wanted to do this final mapping, their mapping, we came to the character of Icelanders, because everybody wanted to have service at their own almost farm or in their backyard. So it is a little bit, people are so close, people are not seeing it as the holistic of Katla Geopark. They're just thinking about their surroundings. So that was kind of challenging, and it will be studied further. But that's why it is so interesting to be part of this project in Europe or in Scandinavia, that they are focusing on similar projects. So I look forward to that.
I'm sure there are more, but we're a little bit running out of time. But I think it's, I have to say that this kind of reminds us of what your example from Hornafjörður when in the beginning, and whether research was a full-time employment or not. It is the kind of same attitude we had towards fisheries and stock management 10, 15 years ago. And nobody questions today. Nobody, and on the positive notes, I think when you put forward professional and sort of well-based research and arguments like you did today, I'm sure you and your colleague will take this profession and take this to a level that can advise and help us plan and do the right things in the future. So it's very important that your voice and your colleagues' voice help, and that we ask you the right questions and promote you and have the courage to take opinion and help with the current decision. And again, you're one of the finest samples. And so at the end of this, we give you a present and hope that you stay with us for a long time. And congratulations on the promotion.
Thank you.
Takk kærlega fyrir.
Takk kærlega fyrir. Wow.